Hello history fans and welcome back to the podcast that helps you learn a little bit of history. It's Women's History Month, so each week I'll be doing a roundup of the women I've been talking about throughout the week on my other socials. For those of you just listening, I'll play the short video I've been posting on Instagram and TikTok, and then we'll expand a little bit. So if you are listening, don't forget to follow the podcast and download it to listen on the go. And if you're watching, please do subscribe and leave a comment letting me know one of your favourite women from history. Let's get into some history now. Similar to the last two women of yesterday's episode, these first three women were random pages in books that I have, so they are behind me somewhere if you can spot them, but that means that 5 of the women I didn't choose, they were randomly picked, so it's really interesting for me to learn about someone new. It's day 11 of 31 days of Women's History for Women's History Month, and today we are learning about Katherine Johnson. Let's find out. Katherine Johnson was a talented mathematician held back by those segregation laws. In the 1950s, she got a job as a computer at NASA, which means that she was doing the maths for all the male scientists who were figuring out how to fly in space. And she went on to play a vital role in the space race. By 1960, she became one of the first women at NASA to have her name and her work credited in a research report. And in 1961, it's her calculations that get the first American into space. In 1962, her calculations sent John Glenn on his orbit of Earth. And when asked what her greatest contribution to space exploration was, she would talk about the calculations that helped sync Project Apollo's lunar module with the Lunar Orbiting Command and Service module. I don't know what that is, but I'm sure it's very important for space and NASA and science. And at age 97 in 2015, she was awarded America's highest civilian honour, which was the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So Katherine Johnson, overcoming racial and gender barriers, she helped mankind make those giant leaps with her math skills that calculated safely getting astronauts to and from the moon. Born in 1918, she quickly mastered maths, starting high school at just 10 years old. She then became a teacher of maths, and at 34 years old, joined the Langley Laboratory at the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which would later become NASA. She worked with other black women as human computers, figuring out the calculations needed for spaceflight. Whilst there, she broke down barriers, like we said, using the bathroom that was supposed to just be for white women. She is so important as she helped calculate the paths for NASA's first human spaceflight in 1961, and then for John Glenn's planet orbit in 1962, and in 1969 she helped calculate the trajectories for Neil Armstrong's mission to the moon on Apollo 11. A very impressive woman whose groundbreaking work wasn't given full recognition until the 2016 film Hidden Figures, so the internet tells me. Next we have a spy story. It's day 12 of 31 days of Women's History for Women's History Month, and we're back with this book to learn about Noor Inayat Khan, 1914 to 1944. This is the story of Noor Inayat Khan, the World War II secret agent who earned one of Britain's highest honours, the George Cross, for her brave work from behind enemy lines in German-occupied Paris. The Special Operations Executive, or SOE, was set up in the summer of 1940 to create a network of spies with the task, in Churchill's words, to set Europe ablaze. They would do so by spying on and sabotaging the German war effort, funneling weapons, money and materials to resistant forces in occupied countries, and setting things on fire. Not anyone could be an SOE agent. To survive behind enemy lines in the SOE's French section, an agent had to be perfectly fluent in the language. Let's do some research. She was born in Moscow, but her family lived in Paris for all of her life, and she was a published children's author. But when Germany invaded France, her and her family fled to England, but she was determined to return. Her agent name was Jean-Marie Rayner, and her code name was Madeleine, whilst in the SOE. She became a radio operator responsible for sending codes and messages to agents in the field, and she was the first female radio operator sent to France. When she arrived in France, the agent who was there to receive her turned out to be a double agent who was working for the Germans, so she had bad luck from the start. She was the only radio operator left, but was determined to stay in France and rebuild the spy network. She was on the run and avoided capture by the Gestapo for 3 months, and just a few days before her replacement was due to swap with her and she could go home, she was captured by the Gestapo. And although she told them nothing whilst in capture, they used her equipment to get London to send supplies directly to them. It's thought that she escaped the first Gestapo prison 3 times, but obviously was court each time, and then transferred to a highly dangerous detainee prison before eventually being sent to a concentration camp when Himmler gave the order that all captured secret agents or spies should be killed because they knew too much about the Nazis and the war was coming to an end. So sadly she met her fate alongside many other captured secret agents. Noor Inayat Khan was a British secret agent and first female radio operator sent to Nazi-occupied France by the SOE, the Special Operations Executive. There's a little fun fact, well, one I thought was interesting, is that she was born on New Year's Day in 1914 in Moscow, and she's a direct descendant of Tipu Sultan, a Muslim ruler of Mysore from the 1700s. First, her family lived in England and then France, where she was educated and began writing her children's stories. But after the fall of France in November of 1940, she escaped to England and joined the WAF, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. And by 1942, she was recruited by the SOE as a radio operator, and by June of 1943, she was over in France. She had to move to new places constantly to avoid capture while sending messages back to London, until in October when she was betrayed by a French woman, and then arrested by the Gestapo. Unfortunately, she had made a mistake and kept all the copies of her secret signals she had been sending to London, so the Germans used her radio to trick London into sending things directly to them. There's so much more to her story, and there's a link in the description if you want to find out more, because we don't have time to cover all of her stories. But while she was in prison, she managed to start communicating with other prisoners by scratching messages into her food bowl. And, as I said in the short, I think, she escaped prison but was then captured and then moved to a prison in Germany, put in solitary confinement, and was apparently tortured but refused to give up any information. Then in September of 1944, along with 3 other female SOE agents, she was transferred to a concentration camp and shot. I don't really know how to move on from that, but let's follow on with another brave woman. It's day 13 of 31 days of Women's History for Women's History Month, and today we're going to start with a guessing game. Okay, I have been called the mother of the civil rights movement. My breaking of segregation laws in 1955 and subsequent arrest led to the organised boycott of Montgomery, Alabama's city bus system, and my refusal to vacate my bus seat for a white passenger triggered the actions that led to the US Supreme Court declaring Montgomery's system of segregated seating unconstitutional. I do hope you all know this, it's of course Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was an African-American civil rights activist. Before the Act of Defiance that solidified her place in history, Parks had already joined the Alabama chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, where she served as its secretary for 12 years. Shortly after her arrest, the 13-month Montgomery bus boycott began, which is widely acknowledged as the spark that ignited the US civil rights movement. Later, after moving to Detroit, Parks worked as a secretary for US Representative John Conyers, helping to find housing for homeless people, as well as serving on the board of Planned Parenthood. In 1999, Parks was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal for bringing America home to our founders' dream. Rosa Macaulay was born in 1913. She left school at 16 to care for her mother and grandmother, and in 1932 she married Raymond Parks, who was a member of the NAACP, the National Associations for the Advancement of Colored People. At the time, Montgomery, Alabama was ruled by the Jim Crow segregation laws, and despite her husband's discouragement out of the fear for her safety, she did join the NAACP in 1943, becoming the chapter secretary, working closely with the chapter president, E.D. Nixon. On the 1st of December 1955, a white man didn't have a seat on the bus, so the driver asked the first row of black people to move. 3 of them obliged. Rosa refused. 2 police officers approached the stopped bus and she was placed in custody. Her husband and E.D. Nixon came to release her on bail that evening, and Nixon then encouraged her to be used as the plaintiff in the case to prove the invalidity of the segregation laws. So, on the day of her trial, the 5th of December, a boycott of the buses would happen. But she was found guilty of violating segregation laws and fined. So, Nixon took advantage of all the people participating in that boycott, and they formed the Montgomery Improvement Association, making Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. president. Nixon and King's homes were bombed as all relating lawsuits worked their way up to the Supreme Court because they had so much anger behind them. And Montgomery gained attention from international press. So by November of 1956, the Supreme Court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional and the boycott ended. And Parks became known as the mother of the civil rights movement. Again, very whistle-stop tour. Let's go back now to ancient history. It's day 14 of 31 Days of Women's History for Women's History Month, and today we are going all the way back to ancient Rome and talking about Fulvia. So there's quite a bit to the start of her story, but we'll skip to 44 BCE when she is marrying Marcus Antonius, a young man at the start of his career lacking the decisiveness and strength that Fulvia can give to him, as has been proven by her past two husbands' political careers. They both died, but now her influence is going to shine on Antony. When Caesar dies, and Antony is one of the co-rulers of Rome, the pair go on a bit of a killing spree, but just for revenge to remove any political rivals. They even killed Cicero, and apparently she took the man's head and spat on it and then put pins in his tongue. But that's probably a rumour made up by his fans because he was a very harsh critic of Mark Antony anyway, so, you know. By 42 BCE, she's at the height of her power, and her and Antony go and pursue Caesar's assassins, and she becomes a de facto co-ruler of Rome. By 41, of course, the hostilities between Octavian and Mark Antony have begun, and she then apparently raises 8 legions in support of Mark Antony. But this starts the war, and apparently she is the driving force in their attempt to take power from Octavian. She then becomes the first woman to have her face on coins, showing us just how important she was. And apparently some of the missiles that Octavian's people launched during the war, they had personal insults written directly to her on them. She suddenly dies of an illness in 40 BCE, and at this point Antony has started having an affair with Cleopatra anyway, so Mark Antony and Octavian decide to just give up fighting and go back to an alliance, and they blame the whole thing on Fulvia. And the fact that they blamed the whole war on her somehow shows that she had political power and influence, and maybe if she was an official member, like a 4th member of a triumvirate, leader of Rome, Roman history would have been very, very different. But instead, she died and the men just gave up fighting. So, Fulvia. Now, there's a much more detailed discussion of her story in my video of Roman women, which is on my YouTube page. So you could just go and watch that. So we're in 44 BCE, and at that point she's a very well-known figure in the Roman public eye, but her husband dies on military service in Africa, so she marries again, allegedly to a man she'd already had relations with whilst with her first husband. So this time she marries the Mark Antony, or properly known as Marcus Antonius. Again, he's a young man at the start of his career, supposedly lacking decisiveness that Fulvia can help with, showing her effect was felt on Antony just as much as it was on her other husbands. When Caesar dies, the couple work together on some revenge killings and remove a lot of political enemies, while Antony is one of the co-rulers of Rome. So this was as part of the second triumvirate. So Caesar was assassinated, and then Antony joined one of Caesar's generals, Lepidus, and Caesar's great-nephew/adopted son, Octavian, who we will later know as Emperor Augustus. They joined together in the 3-man dictatorship of Rome. Of course, it turns sour pretty fast. Fulvia and Antony even kill Marcus Tullius Cicero, or Cicero, in 43 BCE, and according to Cassius Dio's Roman history, Fulvia takes the man's head, spits on it, and takes out the tongue, and pierces it with pins. But this is probably just a rumour started by those that supported Cicero, who was a harsh critic of Antony. Anyway, so rewind, we get to 42 BCE. She's at the height of her power, and Antony and the co-rulers of Rome go to pursue Caesar's assassins, having Fulvia be de facto co-ruler of Rome. In 41, she begins hostilities with Octavian, Antony's main rival of the triumvirate, as he's the adopted son of Caesar. She raises 8 legions in support of Antony, apparently, because Octavian tried to take all credit for the pair's joint actions, but we'll skip over those details because I don't know them. This starts the Perusian War, for which she was the driving force in the attempt to take power from Octavian. At this point, she even becomes the first woman to have her face on a coin. How cool is that? But it also shows how serious she was and her importance during the war, as coins showed her in the form of winged victory, at a time when the only other people on coins were the 3 rulers of the triumvirate. With her brother-in-law, they seized 2 towns, which Octavian then besieged, and we know her importance again in the war from missiles that were launched into the town, because they had personal insults directed at her on them. She then travels to Greece to convince Antony to sail on Italy, as Rome was already divided in the war. And two of the largest naval forces leaders were ready to be there to back Antony. But Fulvia suddenly dies of an illness in 40 BCE, and Antony is supposedly already having affairs with Cleopatra at this point anyways, as well as at this point Antony and Octavian are fighting in Brundisium, where they decide to blame the whole thing on Fulvia, meaning that their very weak alliance survived. So Antony returns to the east with Cleopatra. Octavian has control of Italy. Even though they blamed the whole thing on her as an excuse to just stop fighting, that does back the idea that she was a courageous force to be reckoned with and a strong political leader. You can't blame it on her if she wasn't powerful. She did nearly change the course of Roman history until she unfortunately died, and the men couldn't be bothered to carry on. So shall we move across time to ancient Egypt? We have a collaboration video with 10, who you'll find on Instagram as @DirtDiaries. It's day 15 of 31 days of women's history for Women's History Month, and today we are talking about one of 10's favourite women from history, Hatshepsut.
Hatshepsut is one of my favorite women and kings of ancient Egypt. She assumed all titles and power of kingship for herself, moving from co-regent with Thutmose III to pharaoh, and her reign saw new heights for Dynasty 18.
She was the wife of a pharaoh, and when he died, she ruled as regent for their son. But by 1473 BCE, she decided to take power for herself. So she ruled until 1458 BCE.
While there were a few female rulers before her, Hatshepsut took a different approach. She reinvented her image so much so that statues, paintings, and more depicted her as a male pharaoh. And here at her mortuary temple, she is depicted wearing the symbolic false beard. And to further legitimize her rule, the Oracle of Amun proclaimed her as king. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari was an incredible architectural achievement during her reign, and it's actually located next door to the mortuary temple of Mentuhotep II of Dynasty 11. And this mortuary temple tells the story of her life and reign. Colonnades depict her divine lineage and her expedition into the mysterious land of the gods. And while this is an incredible ancient architectural wonder of the world, Hatshepsut was not buried here. She was buried in the Valley of the Kings. But this temple does hold some scars that occurred after her reign. Following her death, her name was almost erased from history.
When her son took over as pharaoh, he disgracefully tried to wipe her from our history books, but was luckily unsuccessful because of her sarcophagus and the temple. They were rediscovered and the hieroglyphs were decoded to reveal her story.
While her name was chiseled away, she was not forgotten. It was quite the opposite, actually, as her rediscovery in the 19th century allowed her name to be uttered once again, thousands of years later.
Hatshepsut became Queen of Egypt when she was just 12 years old, when she married her half-brother Pharaoh Thutmose II, and when he died she ruled as regent over her stepson. But like we said, she took on the full powers of Pharaoh, becoming the 6th of the 18 pharaohs of that dynasty. Despite her power claim being highly controversial at the time, she defended it with her royal lineage and said that her father had actually appointed her as his successor. She extended trade and built huge new projects, but was largely unknown until the 19th century. Disappointing, as she is one of the few, or most famous, female pharaohs of Egypt. As a final effort to legitimize her reign, she had her father's sarcophagus reburied in her tomb so they could lie together forever. But her stepson, Thutmose III, who took over from her, had practically all evidence of her destroyed, either to erase an example of a powerful female ruler from history, or to fill the gap, or rather hide the gap, in the dynasty's line of male succession. And now we go across history slightly with another collaboration video, this time with Jasmine Alma, who you'll find on Instagram as @legitclassicist. It's day 16 of 31 days of women's history for Women's History Month, and today we are talking about one of Jasmine's favourite women from history, Hypatia.
Hypatia is my favourite woman of the ancient world. Why? Because she's a woman that rises up in the ranks of men and does so based entirely on her intellect, which I find fascinating. And we don't have many examples of women that are held up in high esteem because of their intellect in the ancient world.
She's the earliest known female mathematician, astronomer and philosopher whose works still exist. At the time, she was the world's leading mathematician and astronomer and was a very popular teacher of philosophy.
In 391, the Library of Alexandria sadly burnt to the ground. Now, that's really annoying because I'd love to have seen what was in there. But it was Theon, Hypatia's father, who was in charge of the library at that time. And it's reported that perhaps the Roman Emperor at the time ordered the destruction of the last remaining scrolls that could have survived, which is also annoying. So it's kind of a bit of an annoying part of the story.
She used to help her father write his commentaries, and it's thought that one of the works that was credited to him was solely hers, and it's actually a really important one that was a book about how they thought the universe was created at the time.
We have letters from Hypatia, and they suggest that her students, the letters from her students, that she taught them how to use astrolabes, how to make astronomical calculations, and of course these things were used all the way into the 19th century, so her legacy was very long lasting.
She was also part of the Neoplatonic school, which was a religion that at the time was thought to be paganism, and one of her fans, shall we say, was actually the governor of Alexandria.
The death of Hypatia is kind of actually overshadows her amazing kind of achievements in life often, because it's such a brutal and grotesque story. But at the time, there was a great deal of turmoil going on between pagans and Christians in this part of the world. And she got embroiled in that. And essentially, the new bishop of Alexandria, Cyril, may or may not have ordered her death. But either way, a group of Christian zealots came together in the street as a mob, and they killed her. So they did this in lots of different kind of descriptions of how this might have happened, but it was an absolute mutilation of her body. Some of it that she was kind of stabbed and beaten, and also burned, and cast away. So it's a very, grotesque story. And I'd rather us not focus on her death, but focus on her amazing achievements in life.
Hypatia lived in a very turbulent time of Alexandria's history. At a time when women weren't even thought to have had their own ideas or opinions, she gave talks to large crowds who were all drawn in by her mathematical mind. Because of her powerful father, she became one of the first women who studied maths, astronomy and philosophy. And then she worked with him on updating textbooks. She taught to students who came to her from across the city and influenced mathematicians and astronomers for centuries. She gave public lectures to huge crowds on her new ideas of Neoplatonism, using maths in philosophy, introducing ideas that were different to Christianity, which is of course why we have her grim ending. Because people knew that her philosophy had influence over the governor's rule, supposedly. But most importantly, she gave women a public voice for the first time and showed that they're just as intelligent as men. Because apparently we have to keep proving that. Apologies that those last two were extremely brief overviews, but as they were chosen by two other experts, I think it's best to leave the stories to them, don't you? For the last day of this week, I posted some photos of me with some portraits of women that I will put up on the screen now. But for the audio listeners, first we have the execution of Lady Jane Grey, the heartbreaking, famous portrait by Paul Delaroche that goes viral on TikTok like once a month, I feel like. But you all know her story as you've heard me talk about it so many times before, so moving on. Next we have Venus and Mars by Botticelli, which is one of my favourite artworks ever. Mars is completely asleep, not noticing the satyrs around him being mischievous, while Venus just seems to be watching the chaos unfold. It's also got a long rectangular shape that shows it was probably made as a panel set into the wall of a room, which I just find so interesting. And just for those of you watching, I have Botticelli on my shirt as well today. It's a different painting though. I do really enjoy his work. He's one of the Renaissance artists that always paints classic mythology. I think it's great. Then we had Catherine Parr, who was a supporter of the English Reformation, a scholar, so the first Queen of England to have her work published, works that showed her defiance of the idea that women were inferior. Then we have Elizabeth I, who is featured again properly next week, so we'll talk about her next week. And then Queen Anne, who has her own episode of the podcast, so you can go and listen to that one too. What a brilliant, brilliant coincidence. And that concludes week 3 of Women's History Month. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed, even though I think it's a very, very quick one. If you did enjoy and you're watching, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening, please do follow the podcast and give it as many stars as you think I deserve. 5. Thanks again. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.